All right, welcome back everybody to another edition of the Phya Academy video newsletter. This week we're continuing our investigation into the concept of valor. My beautiful people, I always love talking with you. I always love seeing you virtually. Okay, so what is valor? We've talked about valor a few times, and remember, as subscribers to the newsletter, you get access to all the previous lessons. Right? That's that link you'll find at the bottom of each of these emails that tells you that directs you to the playlist. Right? So if you're new to the list and you've missed those previous two valor videos, then definitely go back and take a look at them. But basically, the concept of valor is bravery or courage when faced with danger, right? It's the strength of mind and spirit or character that enables one to encounter danger with firmness. So it's kind of like our resolve, our resolute determination to overcome in the face of obstacles, in the face of adversity, and indeed in the face of physical danger. And that's kind of what I've been talking about when we've been discussing valor. And one of the striking elements of sport is its relationship to another activity that humans engage in that forces us into a risk situation and makes us confront danger with a resolute and firm disposition, and that is war. And there's a lot of intriguing connections, similarities, and potentially even expressions when we're thinking about sport and war. And this is a subject that I teach quite frequently in my courses. And there's a quote that I absolutely love that helps us understand the relationship between these two activities and why sport may be one of the best examples of an activity that has become extracted from its original source in order to serve its original purpose, but in a more authentic, not necessarily authentic, but in a safer manner. And that quote comes from author and scholar T.J. Cornell. The more war is ritualized, the more it resembles play. Let's unpack that for just a second. The more war is ritualized. To turn something into a ritual means to make it regular, to make it a pattern, and to make it repeatable, right? You do a morning ritual, right? You do the same thing every morning. You get up, maybe you wash your face, maybe you hop right into the shower, maybe you're someone who does like a stretching routine. You make your coffee, etc., etc. You've got a certain way of doing things. Ritual makes a lot of sense in terms of religion, right? You go and you do the same things in the same order every time, whether that's daily prayers, whether that's special religious holidays and feasts, right? There's a specific set pattern of how things are supposed to go. Now, when we think about war, we automatically think of chaos. We think of explosions on the battlefield, right? And confusion and no rules of engagement in terms of a total war, right? You want to defeat your enemy. And what good is allowing your enemy to know your pattern of how you're going to attack, of how you're going to prepare, right? And if you're doing it the same every time, it's not necessarily going to lead you to victory, right? So ritualizing war doesn't seem to make a lot of sense in our modern mind because we operate under this guise of total war, where everything is marshaled towards the absolute victory in war to crush our opponents so that we might not be crushed. But warfare has not always been total. And in fact, initially, warfare was related in a primitive sense. And when I say primitive, what I mean is ritualized. So if you think about the way in which a lot of primitive or tribal warfare is conducted, It's oftentimes ritualistic. The armies will meet on opposing sides. Usually they will wear particular costumes, right, to display themselves. And war was really a chance to showcase your honor, your bravery, your valor, and your courage. And it wasn't a total affair. Usually it was a brief skirmish lasting 10 to 15 minutes. And it was sort of set that after a number of people were killed or injured, that the fighting would be over. One side would be declared a victor, the other would be declared a loser, and they would retire to maybe do it again at a later date. And this gives us a very intriguing ideal of military action, and that it's related more so to the display of leadership, bravery, and courage than it is to dominate, win, and defeat your opponent. If that was the case, why would we bother ritualizing the warfare? And so this allows us to understand that war can be seen as a kind of a play, as a kind of a game between two opposing groups that agree on a predetermined set of rules in order to display something important about their internal character. Now, stop me if I'm describing sport, because I think I actually veered into that. And this gives us an intriguing understanding of the martial qualities of sport, as they are particularly related to the display of characteristics and qualities that are related to leadership. And we see this idea tracked throughout history as well. Some of the very first physical tests that were linked to leadership came to us from the athletic dynasty of the Egyptian pharaohs. There was the ritualized run. It wasn't a very long run. It was kind of like a jog, a couple 100-meter jog out and back. But it was instituted as a means to display that the pharaoh had the physical abilities, the physical competencies to lead. Now, this sort of transfers through a bunch of different means down to the ancient and classical Greeks. And in particular, in the stories of Homer, we've looked at some stories from the Iliad and the Odyssey. One thing that's interesting to note is the athletes are the tribal chieftains, they are the kings and the warriors who are competing in these athletic contests. So this again gives us an interesting understanding and appreciation that sport emerges from a military or martial tradition. And when we talk about the ancient Greek athletes who competed at the Olympics, these were the same individuals who held their shields in battle as hoplites, as political, military representatives of their city-states. And you can see in this ancient depiction on pottery, there was even a race at the ancient Olympics where combatants, and I think that's the right word, combatants would race in their full hoplite armor with their shields and their weapons. So there's this very strong and intimate connection here. But what's very interesting is that the hoplites, right, these citizen soldiers of ancient Greece, they necessitate athletic training, not necessarily for war, right? Because this is also the same time where the gymnasia start to emerge in ancient Greece, and athletic training becomes part and parcel of the education of the youth, male youth, with this eye towards not just military service, but for citizenship as a whole, to be able to vote in the assembly, to be able to make your own way financially, and to be able to serve competently in the military. This gives us a sense that the link between athletics, war, and freedom and leadership comes to us through the cost of sacrifices. The price of being represented costs sacrifices, and sport attunes us to facing challenges and giving the appropriate sacrifices in order to jump past those obstacles and hurdles. Whereas in war, we do the same, but we risk quite a lot in war. We risk our lives. In sport, we can risk our lives, but that's not the expected outcome, at least in most sports. And I think this idea of being represented through sacrifice and the connection between sport and war can be found in many interesting ways in the modern world, especially when we are considering this idea of valor, the willingness to face danger and firmness, and the firmness to do it. Now, there's a lot of timidity, we'll say, in the world right now, and we could use a little bit of valor. We could use a little bit of bravery in the face of opposition and danger. And the example that I want to talk about today is one of the most famous, perhaps the most famous soccer riot that ever occurred, at least to my mind. And that's the 1990 soccer riot between Dinamo Zagreb and Red Star. This is during the initial stages of the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia. So you've got a Serbian ethnicity that's dominating a bunch of other minority ethnicities, the Croatian being one of the big ones. And this is the time of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and communist regimes are sort of teetering and falling apart. There's a lot of internal division, and this can be expressed in multiple ways, but in the former Yugoslavia, it was a soccer match that kicked it off. So we've got Dinamo Zagreb and Red Star Belgrade, representatives of Croatian culture and Serbian culture. They each have their own hooligan groups that essentially are the muscle for each of these groups. There's the Bad Boy Blues for the Dinamo Zagreb and the Delie for Red Star. And in the stands, on the field, when they met in April, I believe it's April 1990, things popped off. And they popped off in a real way. We're talking police, we're talking the military, fans fighting in the stands, destroying the stadium, players fighting with police. And a year later, Croatia is at war with Yugoslavia, fighting for their independence. And what's impressive about this soccer riot is the partisans, the Croatian partisans, who become essentially the guerrilla rebel fighters. They believe that this is the symbolic first battle of the Croatian War of Independence. And there's an amazing statue outside of the Dinamo Zagreb stadium that commemorates this riot and directly links them with the partisan fighters. And when we're trying to think about the connection between martial qualities and sport, something that is striking to note is the rioters, many of the people, especially in the hooligan group, the Delie Blue, and even some of the players on Dinamo Zagreb end up becoming the officers in the Croatian resistance and helping to fight and lead them out of subservience to Yugoslavia and towards freedom and independence. And it shouldn't surprise us that a soccer match is the appropriate arena for this kind of a political expression of freedom, because it is a traditional showcase of valor, of courage to face danger with bravery. And this is exactly the kind of relationship we saw in ancient Greece, particularly with ancient Olympians and their connection to the military. I mentioned that the hoplites are the soldiers are the politicians are the farmers, and the farmers are the athletes when it comes to the classical Greek city-state. There's an excellent example when we're talking about the connection between military and sport, and that is, of course, Milo of Croton, the most famous, the most decorated ancient athlete, 10-time Olympic champion. What's intriguing about Milo, and he lived in the 6th century, so in the 500s BC. This is right around the time of the emergence of the hoplites, of the gymnasium, of athletic training, more broadly speaking, in Greece. And he is this pinnacle of an example. So he not only is the most decorated Olympic athlete, he's also a successful warrior. He successfully leads his city, Croton, into battle against another Greek city-state. And funny enough, he does it wearing the lion skin and with the club of Hercules. And again, some of those earlier videos let you know the ritual and the representational importance of Hercules in this transition from direct to abstracted understanding, which is what's happening in terms of the link between war, sport, and leadership. Whereas leaders used to declare themselves on the battlefield, the qualities of leadership can be best expressed in athletic competition. This would be the demonstration of arete, the best, most excellent virtue in the ancient Greek understanding. And so what we're really seeing in this mix-up of sport and war is that sport and war are the same, essentially. They produce the same kinds of challenges. They produce the same kinds of qualities within us. But one asks us to risk perhaps too much too often, whereas the other can be practiced consistently and will deliver us to our best selves in terms of intellectual development, physical development, and moral development. So sport is kind of like the enhanced, abstracted version of war that allows us to gain all of the valuable qualities that warriors possess without taking on the unnecessary risks of always having to fight. And that just relates not only to your individual station, but to the collective, to the city-state. You don't want a society rife with conflict, rife with instability. And so you don't necessarily want warriors, right, to always have to be displaying those leadership characteristics through war. Having another avenue is extremely beneficial. And this is one of the reasons why sport emerged and evolved. Now, that's a pretty interesting tale, and I kind of threw a lot out there because this is a subject I'm really interested and passionate about, and it's something I've taught about quite frequently. So if I went into full professor mode and there's a lot of, excuse me, what are you talking about? I fill in the gaps quite nicely in the Athletic Hero book. You should still have your discount code from when you signed up. So if you are looking for some gaps to be filled, the book is really great. Or you can just respond, shoot me an email. Hey, what do you mean when you said this? I'd really like you to extrapolate on that. Let's have a conversation. I'm happy to, because when you get into professor mode, yeah, just start talking, don't you, right? Okay, but we need to take this message, right? And we have to be able to understand it, and we have to be able to apply it. And the sort of idea is, I'm not asking you to become this kind of a warrior through sport. What I'm telling you is that sport is the same as war, but an abstracted version. So it means that when we're engaged in athletic training, we're training the same qualities. We're learning how to act in the same courageous fashion. This is one of the reasons why combat sports or martial arts is something that a lot of people preach, and probably everybody should practice in one way, shape, or form, because it gives us that confidence in ourselves, because we're willingly putting ourselves into this dangerous position. We're being exposed. We are vulnerable. We're likely to be hurt or defeated, right, by a superior opponent. And this is going to allow us to get stronger, get tougher, to be able to look adversity in the eye, and especially physical adversity or dangerous adversity, and to overcome it, to jump right over it, right? the willingness to face danger with bravery also inspires others, right? So when we display this, or when we see somebody else modeling this kind of attitude and behavior, it lets us know, it teaches us that we have the same capabilities, we have the same potential. Pardon me. And so you don't need to become a warrior through sport. We don't need to think of ourselves as soldiers, although if that's an idea or an analogy that helps you, hey, go for it. But I think what we really need to understand is that sports are a vehicle to face danger in a safer environment, and that exposure to danger allows our characters to grow and allows us to become better leaders, better modelers, better students, better teachers. And so it's really something that we should consider. And it doesn't have to be direct combat sport. Maybe it's doing something in nature that's got a little bit of an edge to it, right? But we want to think about it not in the dumb way of exposing ourselves to undue risk. That would be kind of like the idea of war in the ancient world. We want to expose ourselves to risk in a more controlled setting, in a more abstracted sense, in terms of we can maybe simulate the danger. My guys out there and girls who do lots of strength and power, you might feel similar things like when you're walking up to a really heavy lift with the bar. The potential for injury and danger is real, right? So we just have to maybe open our eyes to the understanding of risk so that we can understand and appreciate that sport, athletic exertion is a means for us to engage in risk, so that we may generate and bring about more valor and more courage in our overall life. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Always great seeing you. This one went a little bit long. That's what happens sometimes with a professor. All right. I'll see everybody in the next one. Have a great one. I always love talking with you guys.